The sun peeks over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold as it ushers in a new day in the quiet suburb of Oakwood. The streets slowly come to life, with joggers pounding the pavement and early risers walking their dogs. But it's the growing chorus of children's voices that truly signals the start of the morning. Oakwood Elementary stands tall and proud, its red brick facade a beacon of learning in the heart of the community. The American flag flutters gently in the breeze, as if waving a cheerful greeting to the students trickling onto the grounds. The air buzzes with excitement, filled with the chatter of friends reuniting after a long night apart. A yellow school bus pulls up, its doors swinging open to release a flood of energetic children. They pour out onto the sidewalk, backpacks bouncing, laughter echoing across the schoolyard. Some race to join friends already gathered in small clusters, while others make a beeline for the playground, squeezing in a few precious minutes of fun before the bell rings. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, a solitary figure catches the eye. Amara, an 8-year-old girl with dark skin and bright eyes, walks slowly along the sidewalk leading to the school. Her backpack seems almost too big for her small frame, yet she carries it with quiet determination. There's a softness to her smile, a hint of shyness as she observes the chaos around her. But something is off. As Amara's feet hit the pavement, there's an unusual sound, or rather, a lack of sound. No tap of shoes, no squeak of rubber soles. The girl's feet are bare, small toes curling against the cool concrete. It's a jarring sight, one that seems to go unnoticed by the bustling crowd of students and parents. At the school's entrance, Mrs. Thompson stands like a lighthouse, her warm smile guiding students safely into harbor. Her salt and pepper hair is pulled back in a neat bun, and her floral dress sways gently in the morning breeze. She greets each child by name, her voice carrying a melody of genuine care and enthusiasm. "Good morning, Tyler. Did you finish that book we talked about?" She calls out to a freckle-faced boy who beams in response. "Sophia, I love your new backpack," she exclaims to a girl proudly showing off her glittery accessory. As Amara approaches, Mrs. Thompson's smile falters for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly as she takes in the girl's bare feet. But her warmth doesn't fade. "Amara, sweetheart, it's wonderful to see you," she says, her voice gentle. "How are you this morning?" Amara's smile grows a little brighter as she looks up at her teacher. "I'm okay, Mrs. Thompson," she replies softly, her voice barely audible above the clamor of the schoolyard. Inside the school, the hallways are a kaleidoscope of color and motion. Lockers slam open and shut, creating a rhythmic percussion to accompany the symphony of voices. Friends huddle in small groups, sharing secrets and weekend adventures. The walls are adorned with vibrant artwork and motivational posters, a testament to the creativity and aspirations that fill these halls. Mr. Reynolds, the school principal, stands at the intersection of two main corridors, his presence commanding respect. His salt and pepper hair is neatly trimmed, and his crisp white shirt and navy tie give him an air of authority. He watches the controlled chaos with a mixture of pride and vigilance, occasionally calling out reminders about walking in the halls or picking up stray pieces of litter. As the students file into their classrooms, the energy shifts. Excitement gives way to a more focused atmosphere, with children settling into their desks and pulling out notebooks and pencils. Mrs. Thompson's room is a haven of warmth and encouragement. Colorful posters line the walls, showcasing everything from multiplication tables to inspirational quotes. A reading nook in the corner, filled with plush pillows and overflowing bookshelves, beckons to young minds eager to explore new worlds. Amara makes her way to her desk, her bare feet padding softly against the cool linoleum floor. A few of her classmates notice, eyebrows raised in curiosity. Some whisper behind their hands, while others simply stare. Amara keeps her head down, focusing on arranging her supplies on her desk with meticulous care. Mrs. Thompson begins the day with her signature morning greeting, her voice filled with enthusiasm that's impossible to resist. "Good morning, class. Are we ready for another exciting day of learning?" As the day winds down, the energy in the school shifts once again. The final bell rings, signaling the end of classes. Students burst out of the building like a dam breaking, their voices rising in a crescendo of freedom and excitement. Amara emerges last, her steps slow and measured, As she begins her walk home, Mrs. Thompson watches from the school steps, her brow furrowed in concern. She turns to find Mr. Reynolds standing beside her, his eyes also following Amara's retreating figure. "Is everything all right with Amara?" Mr. Reynolds asks, his typically stern voice softened with concern. Mrs. Thompson shakes her head slowly. "I'm not sure," she admits, "but I intend to find out." As Amara disappears around the corner, the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the schoolyard. The day may be over, but for Amara, Mrs. Thompson, and Mr. Reynolds, a new chapter is just beginning. One that will challenge their perceptions, test their compassion, and ultimately reveal a truth that will change their lives forever. As the golden hues of dawn give way to the bright blue of a new day, Oakwood Elementary buzzes with the familiar rhythm of learning. The hallways, once a cacophony of excited chatter, now echo with the muffled sounds of lessons in progress. It's a scene that typically brings comfort to Mrs. Thompson, a reassuring constancy in the ever-changing world of education. But today, something feels off. In her classroom, Mrs. Thompson's keen eyes scan the rows of desks, taking in the sea of young faces before her. Most are attentive, their expressions a mix of concentration and the occasional daydream. But her gaze lingers on one student in particular, Amara. The young girl sits in the third row, her posture rigid and her eyes fixed on the notebook before her. While her classmates fidget and whisper, Amara remains still, an island of silence in a sea of subtle movement. It's a stark contrast to her usual demeanor. Quiet, yes, but always with a spark of curiosity in her eyes. Mrs. Thompson clears her throat, drawing the class's attention. "All right, everyone. Let's turn to page 37 in our science books. We're going to learn about the water cycle today." Her voice carries its usual enthusiasm, but there's an undercurrent of concern that she can't quite mask. As the students rustle through their backpacks and flip pages, Mrs. Thompson notices something else unusual. Despite the warm spring day outside, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint hum of air conditioning in the background, Amara is wearing long pants. The thick, dark fabric seems out of place among the sea of shorts and skirts worn by her classmates. The lesson progresses, with Mrs. Thompson explaining the journey of a water droplet from cloud to earth and back again. She moves around the room, her floral dress swishing softly as she gestures to the diagrams on the board. "Can anyone tell me what we call it when water falls from the clouds?" she asks, her eyes scanning the room. Several hands shoot up, eager faces beaming with the anticipation of sharing knowledge. But Amara's hand remains down, her eyes fixed on her desk. It's so unlike her not to participate, even if just with a whisper. "Amara," Mrs. Thompson calls gently, hoping to draw the girl out of her shell. "Would you like to answer?" Amara's head snaps up, her eyes wide with surprise. Rain," she replies, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the classroom. Mrs. Thompson smiles warmly. "That's right, Amara. Very good." But the praise doesn't bring the usual shy smile to Amara's face. Instead, she quickly looks back down, her shoulders hunching as if trying to make herself smaller. The unusual behavior doesn't go unnoticed by Amara's classmates. Whispers start to ripple through the room, curious glances darting in her direction. Mrs. Thompson catches snippets of conversation. "Why is she so quiet? Did you see her feet earlier? What's wrong with her pants?" She claps her hands, drawing attention back to the lesson. Now, who can tell me what happens to the rain once it hits the ground? But even as she continues teaching, Mrs. Thompson's mind is racing, piecing together the puzzle that Amara presents. As the morning wears on, the oddities surrounding Amara become more apparent. During group work, she hesitates to join her peers, hanging back until Sarah, a kind-hearted girl with pigtails, wades her over. Even then, Amara keeps her distance, careful not to let her legs brush against the desks or her classmates. As Amara finally makes her way to the door, Mrs. Thompson calls out softly, "Have a good evening, Amara. I'll see you tomorrow." Amara pauses, turning to look at her teacher. For a brief moment, her carefully constructed mask slips, revealing a depth of sadness that takes Mrs. Thompson's breath away. Then, with a small nod, Amara is gone, disappearing into the crowd of students flooding the hallways. Mrs. Thompson sinks into her chair, her heart heavy with worry. She pulls out a notepad, jotting down her observations from the day. The bare feet, the long pants, the wince of pain, the uncharacteristic silence. Individually, each could be explained away, but together, they paint a troubling picture. As the last echoes of children's voices fade from the building, Mrs. Thompson gathers her notes and heads for the principal's office. Her steps are determined, her mind made up. Whatever is going on with Amara, she won't face it alone. Not if Mrs. Thompson has anything to say about it. The hallways, usually so full of life, seem almost eerie in their emptiness. Mrs. Thompson's footsteps echo off the lockers, each step bringing her closer to Mr. Reynolds' office, and hopefully to answers about Amara's situation. As she approaches the principal's door, Mrs. Thompson takes a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. She knows that what she's about to share could set in motion a chain of events that could change Amara's life forever. But as she raises her hand to knock, she's certain of one thing. Sometimes, the most important lessons happen outside the classroom. The sound of her knuckles against the wooden door seems to reverberate through the empty corridor. It's a sound that marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a chapter that will test the limits of compassion, challenge preconceptions, and ultimately reveal a truth that will shake the foundations of Oakwood Elementary. The school bell rings, its shrill tone cutting through the air like a knife, signaling the start of recess. The hallways of Oakwood Elementary erupt into a cacophony of excitement as children pour out of classrooms, their voices rising in a crescendo of freedom. It's a daily ritual, a brief respite from the world of learning. But today, there's an undercurrent of tension that electrifies the atmosphere. As students flood onto the playground, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floors, whispers begin to circulate. Eyes dart towards Amara, who walks slowly, deliberately, her gaze fixed on the ground. She's a solitary figure amidst the sea of laughing, shouting children, and her isolation is palpable. "Did you see her this morning?" A freckle-faced boy named Tommy whispers to his friend, his eyes wide with curiosity. "She wasn't wearing any shoes." His friend, a girl with pigtails named Sarah, nods vigorously. "I know, and did you see how she winced when she sat down in class?" Something's definitely wrong. The playground, usually a scene of unbridled joy, takes on a different energy today. The swings creak rhythmically, the slide gleams in the midday sun, but there's a buzz of speculation that overshadows the usual carefree play. Amara makes her way to a secluded bench near the school building, her steps careful and measured. She sits down gingerly, her long pants hiding her feet from view, but the memory of her barefoot entrance that morning lingers in her classmates' minds. A group of girls huddled near the monkey bars can't help but stare. Maybe she lost her shoes, one suggests, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Or maybe she can't afford them. Another whispers, her voice tinged with a mix of pity and fascination. "Don't be silly," a third chimes in. "Everyone can afford shoes. There must be something else going on." Their theories grow wilder with each passing moment, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. In their young minds, Amara's situation becomes a mystery to be solved, a puzzle to be pieced together. Across the playground, Lily, a kind-hearted girl with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, watches the scene unfold with growing concern. She's been Amara's friend since the start of the school year, drawn to the quiet girl's gentle nature and quick wit. But today, Amara seems like a stranger, withdrawn and unreachable. Lily takes a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knows might be a difficult conversation. She makes her way across the playground, weaving through groups of playing children, her eyes fixed on Amara's solitary figure. As she approaches, Lily can see the tension in Amara's shoulders, the way her hands grip the edge of the bench so tightly her knuckles turn white. "Hey, Amara," Lily says softly, her voice barely audible above the playground noise. "Mind if I sit with you?" The morning sun filters through the windows of Oakwood Elementary, casting long shadows across the hallways as students file in for another day of learning. The air is thick with anticipation, whispers from yesterday still echoing in the corridors. Eyes dart towards the main entrance, searching for a familiar figure. Amara arrives just as the first bell rings, her steps measured and careful. She keeps her head down, avoiding the curious glances of her classmates. Today, she wears sneakers, old and worn, but shoes nonetheless. The sight sends a ripple of confusion through the watching crowd. Wasn't she barefoot yesterday? What changed? As students settle into their homerooms, the buzz of speculation grows louder. Mrs. Thompson's class is particularly restless, fidgeting in their seats as they wait for the day to begin. Lily, her face etched with worry, keeps glancing at Amara's empty desk. The door creaks open, and Amara slips in, her movements slow and deliberate. She makes her way to her seat, wincing slightly as she sits down. Mrs. Thompson watches her with a mixture of concern and determination. Today, she thinks, we might get some answers. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Thompson says, her voice warm but tinged with an undercurrent of tension. "We have a special treat today. For our art lesson, we'll be doing a project on self-expression through body art." A ripple of excitement runs through the room. Art class is always a favorite, a break from the usual routine of math and reading. But today, it feels different. There's an electric charge in the air, a sense that something significant is about to happen. Mrs. Thompson continues, her eyes briefly flickering to Amara. "We'll be creating footprint paintings. Everyone will remove their shoes and socks, step into some washable paint, and then walk across a large piece of paper. We'll use the resulting prints as the basis for a larger artwork." The classroom erupts into chatter, students already discussing color choices and design ideas. But in the midst of the excitement, one student remains still and silent. Amara sits rigid in her chair, her face a mask of barely concealed panic. Lily notices immediately. She watches as Amara's hands grip the edges of her desk, knuckles turning white with the force of her grasp. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. As Mrs. Thompson begins to hand out supplies, moving from desk to desk with pots of brightly colored paint, Amara's breathing becomes more rapid. Her eyes dart around the room, looking for an escape. "Mrs. Thompson." Amara's voice is barely above a whisper, but in the busy classroom, it cuts through the noise like a knife. I don't feel well. Can I sit this one out?" The room falls silent. All eyes turn to Amara, then to Mrs. Thompson. The teacher pauses, paintbrush in hand, her expression a mixture of concern and calculation. "Of course, Amara," Mrs. Thompson says gently. "If you're not feeling well, you don't have to participate. Would you like to go to the nurse's office?" Amara shakes her head quickly, relief flooding her features. "No, I'll be okay. I just need to sit quietly." Mrs. Thompson nods, her eyes never leaving Amara's face. "All right, you can observe today then. But if you start feeling worse, please let me know immediately." As the class returns to their excited chatter, Mrs. Thompson makes her way to Amara's desk. She kneels down, bringing herself to eye level with the girl. "Amara," she says softly, her voice pitched low so only Amara can hear, "is there something you want to tell me? About why you don't want to take off your shoes?" For a moment, it seems Amara might break. Her lower lip trembles, her eyes filling with unused tears. But then, like a switch being flipped, her expression hardens. "No, Mrs. Thompson, I'm just not feeling well." Mrs. Thompson sighs, standing up. She knows pushing further right now won't help, but her resolve strengthens. Something is going on, and she's determined to get to the bottom of it. As the art project begins, the classroom transforms into a riot of color and laughter. Students dip their feet into trays of paint, giggling at the cool, squishy sensation. They march across long sheets of paper, leaving trails of blue, red, yellow, and green in their wake. Amara sits at her desk, separate from the joyful chaos. Her eyes follow her classmates' movements, a mixture of longing and fear in her gaze. Lily, her feet covered in purple paint, catches Amara's eye and offers a small, encouraging smile. Amara tries to return it, but the expression doesn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Thompson moves around the room, offering praise and guidance, but her attention keeps returning to Amara. She notices how the girl shifts uncomfortably in her seat, how she keeps her feet tucked tightly under her chair. Even in the midst of the colorful mayhem, Amara seems to exist in a bubble of tension. "Figured what out, Amara?" Mrs. Thompson presses gently. "What are you afraid of people knowing?" The silence that follows is heavy, charged with unspoken truths. Amara's gaze drops to her feet, encased in their worn sneakers. Her hands clench and unclench in her lap, a physical manifestation of her internal struggle. If I tell you, she finally says, her voice trembling, you'll make me leave. You'll send me away, just like the last school. Mrs. Thompson's heart breaks at the fear in Amara's voice. She slides off the desk, kneeling in front of the girl to meet her eyes. Amara, listen to me. Whatever it is, whatever you're afraid of, I promise you that I'm here to help. You're safe here. No one is going to send you away. Amara looks up, hope warring with fear in her eyes. You promise? I promise, Mrs. Thompson says firmly. Now, can you tell me what's going on? Why are you so afraid of people seeing your feet? Amara takes a deep, shuddering breath. Her hands move to the laces of her sneakers, trembling so badly she can barely undo the knots. Mrs. Thompson watches, her heart in her throat, as Amara slowly, painfully, removes her shoes and socks. What's revealed makes Mrs. Thompson gasp, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Amara's feet are a mess of cuts, bruises, and angry red welts. Some of the wounds look fresh, others partially healed. It's a map of pain etched onto the delicate skin of a child's feet. Oh, Amara, Mrs. Thompson breathes, her voice choked with emotion. Who did this to you? Amara's shoulders shake with silent sobs. My stepdad, she whispers. He says it's to keep me from running away. He says if my feet hurt, I'll stay home where I belong. The truth, finally spoken aloud, hangs in the air between them. Mrs. Thompson feels a surge of anger, quickly followed by a fierce protectiveness. She reaches out, gently taking Amara's hands in her own. Amara, look at me, she says, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. What's happening to you is not okay. It's not your fault, and you don't deserve it. We're going to get you help, I promise. Amara nods, tears streaming down her face. What's going to happen now? She asks, her voice small and frightened. Mrs. Thompson takes a deep breath, her mind racing. She knows the proper protocols, the steps she's supposed to take. But looking at Amara's terrified face, she also knows that handling this wrong could shatter the fragile trust they've built. First, she says, we're going to take care of your feet. Then, I'm going to call some people who can help make sure you're safe. It might be a little scary, but I'll be with you every step of the way. Okay. Amara nods again, a tiny spark of hope flickering in her eyes. As Mrs. Thompson helps her put her shoes back on, careful not to cause any more pain, the first bell rings. The sound of students filling the hallways filters into the classroom, a reminder of the normal world continuing just outside the door. But inside this room, everything has changed. A terrible secret has been revealed. A burden too heavy for a child to bear alone has been shared. As Mrs. Thompson stands, her hand gentle on Amara's shoulder, she knows that the road ahead will be difficult, but she's determined to see it through, to fight for this brave, resilient girl who has already endured so much. The mystery of Amara's hidden feet has been solved, but the story is far from over. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting its light through the classroom windows, Mrs. Thompson and Amara step out into the hallway together, ready to face whatever comes next. The truth has been unleashed, and nothing will ever be the same at Oakwood Elementary. The classroom buzzes with the low hum of students settling in for the day, backpacks rustling and chairs scraping against the linoleum floor. But for Mrs. Thompson, the familiar sounds fade into the background, her focus entirely on the small figure hunched over a desk in the third row. Amara sits rigidly, her eyes fixed on the notebook before her, pencil gripped so tightly her knuckles have turned white. The revelation of moments ago hangs heavy in the air between them, an invisible barrier separating Amara from the carefree chatter of her classmates. Mrs. Thompson moves through the room, greeting students with a warm smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Her mind races, torn between the need to follow protocol and report Amara's situation immediately, and the fear of shattering the fragile trust they've built. As the final bell rings, signaling the start of class, Mrs. Thompson makes a decision. She can't let Amara sit there, alone with her pain and fear. With a deep breath, she approaches Amara's desk, kneeling down to bring herself to eye level with the girl. The fear in Amara's voice breaks Mrs. Thompson's heart. She reaches out, placing her hand gently over Amara's. I believe you, she says firmly, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make sure you're safe. You're not alone in this anymore, Amara. A single tear escapes, rolling down Amara's cheek. She wipes it away quickly, but not before Mrs. Thompson sees a flicker of something in her eyes, a tiny spark of hope. As the lunch period draws to a close, Mrs. Thompson knows she can't put off the inevitable any longer. She needs to report what she's learned, to set in motion the wheels that will, hopefully, bring Amara the help she so desperately needs. "Amara," she says as they stand to clear away their lunch things, "I need you to be brave for me. I have to talk to some people about what's happening. People who can help make sure you're safe." Panic flashes across Amara's face. "No, please," she begs, her voice rising with fear. "You promised you wouldn't tell anyone." Mrs. Thompson kneels down, bringing herself to Amara's eye level. "I know you're scared," she says softly, "but sometimes keeping a secret can hurt more than telling the truth. I promise you, I'll be with you every step of the way. You're not alone in this, Amara, not anymore." As the afternoon bell rings, signaling the end of lunch, Mrs. Thompson watches Amara make her way back to her desk. The girl's steps are slow, hesitant, as if she's walking on eggshells, or perhaps Mrs. Thompson thinks with a pang, as if every step causes her pain. The classroom fills with the chatter of returning students, but Mrs. Thompson's focus remains on Amara. She watches as the girl sinks into her chair, tugging her pant legs down over her ankles once more. It's a small gesture, but it speaks volumes about the secret still hidden, the pain still unspoken. As Mrs. Thompson turns to write the afternoon's lesson on the board, her mind is already racing ahead. She knows the road ahead will be difficult, filled with uncomfortable questions and hard truths. But looking at Amara, seeing the weight of fear and secrecy pressing down on those small shoulders, she knows she has no choice. The truth must come to light, no matter how painful the process might be. For Amara's sake, for the sake of her future, the silence must be broken. As the afternoon sun streams through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the floor, Mrs. Thompson steels herself for the battle ahead. The mystery of Amara's hidden feet may have been solved, but the real fight, the fight for Amara's safety and well-being, is only just beginning. Mr. Reynolds nods, understanding the delicate balance Mrs. Thompson has been trying to strike. "You did the right thing, trying to build that trust. But now we need to act. We have a duty to protect our students. And if Amara is being harmed," he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The gravity of the situation hangs heavy in the air between them. "What do we do now?" Mrs. Thompson asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Reynolds stands, his decision made. "First, we call Child Protective Services. Then, we talk to Amara. Together. She needs to know she has a support system here, that we're on her side." As they prepare to leave the classroom, a commotion in the hallway catches their attention. The lunch period is ending, students flooding back to their classrooms in a wave of noise and energy. Through the open door, they catch a glimpse of Amara. She's walking slowly, carefully, her steps measured as if each one causes her pain. As she passes the classroom, her eyes meet Mr. Reynolds for a brief moment. In that instant, he sees a world of fear, pain, and silent pleading that takes his breath away. The moment passes, and Amara continues down the hall. But for Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Thompson, everything has changed. The truth they've uncovered, the responsibility they now bear, weighs heavily on their shoulders. As the last stragglers make their way to class, Mr. Reynolds turns to Mrs. Thompson. "This won't be easy," he says softly, "for any of us, but we have to do what's right for Amara." Mrs. Thompson nods, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "She's so scared, Mr. Reynolds. What if we make things worse?" The principal places a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We can't let fear stop us from doing what's necessary. Amara needs us to be brave for her now." Together, they make their way to the principal's office. Each step feels momentous, as if they're walking not just down a school hallway, but towards a pivotal moment that will change lives forever. In the office, Mr. Reynolds picks up the phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. He takes a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation to come. As he dials the number for Child Protective Services, he can't shake the image of Amara's eyes, those deep pools of fear and silent suffering. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the deserted playground of Oakwood Elementary. Inside, the hallways echo with an eerie silence, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of just hours ago. But in the principal's office, a tension crackles in the air, electric and undeniable. Mr. Reynolds sits behind his imposing oak desk, his usually stern face etched with lines of worry. Across from him, Mrs. Thompson perches on the edge of her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Between them lies a stack of files, each one a piece of the puzzle they're desperately trying to solve. "Let's go through this again," Mr. Reynolds says, his voice low and grave. "When did you first notice something was off with Amara?" Mrs. Thompson closes her eyes, thinking back. "It was subtle at first," she begins, her voice barely above a whisper. "Little things." She stopped raising her hand in class. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. But then, she trails off, her gaze falling to the file open before her. A class photo from the beginning of the year shows Amara beaming at the camera, surrounded by friends. The contrast to the solitary figure they'd seen in the cafeteria earlier is stark and heartbreaking. Mr. Reynolds nods, encouraging her to continue. And then came the day she showed up without shoes, Mrs. Thompson says, her voice catching. "She was so scared, so desperate to hide her feet. And when I saw them," she shakes her head, unable to finish the sentence. Mr. Reynolds leans back in his chair, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Let's look at her records," he says, reaching for another file. "Maybe there's something we've missed." Together, they pore over Amara's school history, report cards, attendance records, notes from previous teachers, all paint a picture of a bright, engaged student. Until suddenly, they don't. "Look here," Mr. Reynolds says, pointing to a graph charting Amara's class participation. "See how it drops off suddenly about 2 months ago?" Mrs. Thompson leans in, her eyes widening. "That's right around the time I started noticing changes in her behavior," she says, the realization dawning on her face. They continue through the files, each new piece of information adding to the growing knot of dread in their stomachs. Incomplete homework assignments, a sudden increase in absences, notes from the school nurse about frequent stomach aches and headaches. "How did we miss this?" Mrs. Thompson whispers, her voice thick with guilt. "It's all right here, in black and white." Mr. Reynolds reaches across the desk, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "We can't change the past," he says firmly, "but we can act now. We need to do a home visit." The words hang in the air between them, heavy with implications. A home visit is no small thing. It's a step that could change everything. For better or worse. Mrs. Thompson nods slowly, her resolve strengthening. "You're right," she says. "We need to see for ourselves what's going on in Amara's home life." As they begin to plan their next steps, a sudden gust of wind rattles the office window. Outside, dark clouds are gathering on the horizon, a fitting backdrop to the storm brewing within the school walls. Mr. Reynolds picks up the phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. "I'll call Child Protective Services," he says. "We'll need them to accompany us on this visit." As he makes the call, Mrs. Thompson finds herself drawn to the window. The playground equipment casts long, distorted shadows across the empty schoolyard. She can't help but think of Amara, wondering where she is right now, what she might be enduring. The conversation with CPS is brief but intense. Plans are made, a time is set. Tomorrow morning, they'll go to Amara's home, armed with their concerns and the weight of their responsibility. As Mr. Reynolds hangs up the phone, a heavy silence falls over the office. The enormity of what they're about to do settles on their shoulders like a physical weight. "Are we doing the right thing?" Mrs. Thompson asks softly, voicing the doubt that's been nagging at her. Mr. Reynolds stands, moving to join her at the window. "We have to believe we are," he says, his voice firm. "If there's even a chance that Amara is in danger, we have to act. It's our duty." They stand there for a moment, watching as the first drops of rain begin to fall, pattering against the window pane. The weather seems to mirror their mood, dark, foreboding, but with the promise of cleansing, of renewal. As they prepare to leave for the day, gathering up files and steeling themselves for what's to come, Mr. Reynolds pauses at the door. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he says, turning to Mrs. Thompson, "we're in this together." For Amara, as Mrs. Thompson makes her way down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet, She can feel her pulse pounding in her ears. She pauses in front of the closed door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Whatever lies behind this door could change everything. It could be the key to unlocking the mystery of Amara's hidden feet, to understanding the pain and fear that have haunted her young student's eyes. With a silent prayer, Mrs. Thompson turns the knob. The door swings open, revealing a small bedroom. And there, huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear and her feet bare and bruised, is Amara. In that moment, as their eyes meet across the room, Mrs. Thompson knows that nothing will ever be the same again. The truth has been uncovered, and now the real fight begins. The fight to save Amara, to give her the safety and love every child deserves. The storm that's been brewing has finally broken, and in its wake, a new chapter is about to unfold. The morning sun struggles to break through a thick blanket of clouds, casting a gloomy pall over the quiet suburban street. A gentle drizzle falls, creating a misty veil that seems to blur the edges of reality. In this dreary tableau, three figures stand before a modest two-story house, their expressions a mixture of determination and apprehension. Mrs. Thompson shivers slightly, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Mr. Reynolds stands tall, his usual authoritative presence somewhat diminished by the worry etched across his face. Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services completes the trio, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the educator's visible anxiety. The house before them should be Amara's home. The address matches the one in her school records, a place that should be filled with the warmth and laughter of a young girl's life. But as they approach the front door, an eerie silence envelops them. No lights shine through the windows, no signs of life stir behind the drawn curtains. Mr. Reynolds steps forward, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wooden door. The sound echoes hollowly, seeming to emphasize the emptiness within. They wait, hearts pounding, for any response, but only silence greets them. Maybe they're not home, Mrs. Thompson suggests, her voice tinged with hope and fear in equal measure. But deep down she knows something is terribly wrong. Sarah Chen moves to peer through a side window, her hand cupped against the glass to block out the glare. "It's empty," she announces, her professional tone unable to mask the concern in her voice. "Completely vacant." The words hit Mrs. Thompson like a physical blow. Empty. But how? Where is Amara? Where is the little girl with the bright eyes and wounded feet, the child who has haunted her thoughts and dreams? Mr. Reynolds tries the doorknob, finding it locked. He steps back, running a hand through his graying hair in frustration. "This doesn't make any sense," he mutters. "Amara was in school just yesterday. How can the house be empty?" As they stand there, confusion and worry mounting, a voice calls out from next door, "You looking for the Johnsons?" They turn to see an elderly woman standing on the neighboring porch, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. Her eyes are kind but filled with curiosity as she regards the strange trio on her street. "Yes, we are," Sarah Chen responds, her training kicking in. "Do you know where they might be?" The neighbor shakes her head, a small frown creasing her brow. "They moved out weeks ago. Middle of the night, if you can believe it. One day they were here, the next, poof, gone without a word." Mrs. Thompson feels the ground shift beneath her feet, her world tilting on its axis. Weeks ago. But that's impossible. Amara has been in her classroom every day, a quiet presence in the third row, her pain hidden behind careful smiles and long pants. "That can't be right," she says, her voice shaking. "Amara's been coming to school. We've seen her every day." The neighbor's eyebrows rise in surprise. "Amara, the little girl? No, dear, I'm quite certain. I haven't seen that child in weeks. Poor thing always looked so sad. I worried about her, you know. Her classroom for the night. She can't help but feel that this is more than just an ending to Amara's story. It's a beginning. For Amara, for Oakwood Elementary, and for every child who might need a helping hand in the future. The school stands silent now, but it holds within its walls the echoes of the day's events, the promise of tomorrow, and the unshakable proof that when a community comes together, there's no challenge too great to overcome. The mystery is solved, but the true story, the story of compassion, unity, and hope, is just beginning. The morning sun rises over Oakwood Elementary, its golden rays painting the brick facade with a warm glow. But today, the school buzzes with an energy that has nothing to do with the weather. The air thrums with purpose, with compassion, with the unmistakable feeling that something extraordinary is unfolding. In the gymnasium, transformed overnight into a makeshift donation center, Mrs. Thompson stands in awe. Tables groan under the weight of clothes, shoes, and non-perishable food items. Volunteers, a mix of students, parents, and staff, weave between the piles, sorting and organizing with determined efficiency. Mrs. Thompson, a voice calls out. It's Lily, her face flushed with excitement as she rushes over, arms laden with brand new backpacks. Look what my dad's company donated. There's one for Amara and extras for any other kid who might need them. Mrs. Thompson's heart swells with pride. That's wonderful, Lily. Thank you. She watches as the young girl carefully arranges the backpacks, making sure each one is perfectly placed. The care in her actions speaks volumes about the impact Amara's story has had on her classmates. Across the room, Mr. Reynolds is deep in conversation with a group of local business owners. Their voices are low, but the excitement is palpable. One man, the owner of a nearby hotel, is gesturing animatedly. Mrs. Thompson catches snippets of their conversation: temporary housing, job opportunities, community support. As she makes her way through the gym, Mrs. Thompson is struck by the sheer variety of donations. There are basics, of course: clothes, food, toiletries. But there are also books, toys, and even a laptop computer donated by the local electronics store. Each item represents not just material support, but a message. You are not alone. We see you. We care. Outside, in the school parking lot, a different kind of flurry is taking place. A moving truck, donated for the day by a local company, is being loaded with furniture. Volunteers form a human chain, passing sofas, beds, and kitchen appliances from hand to hand. The air rings with calls of encouragement and the occasional grunt of exertion. Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services stands nearby, clipboard in hand, overseeing the logistics. Her professional demeanor is softened by the smile that keeps tugging at her lips. I've never seen anything like this, she confides to Mrs. Thompson. The speed at which this community has mobilized, it's incredible. As the morning progresses, more and more people arrive. Parents drop off donations on their way to work. Students who would normally be sleeping in on a Saturday show up in droves, eager to help. Even the local media has caught wind of the story, with a news van parked discreetly at the edge of the school grounds. In the midst of the controlled chaos, a hush suddenly falls over the gymnasium. All eyes turn to the entrance, where Amara and her mother have just appeared. They stand frozen, overwhelmed by the scene before them. Mr. Reynolds is at their side in an instant, his hand gently guiding them into the room. This is all for you, he says softly, and for anyone else who might need help in the future. Mrs. Johnson's eyes fill with tears as she takes in the mountains of donations, the faces of friends and strangers alike who have come together to support her family. Amara, usually so reserved, breaks into a smile that lights up her entire face. As word spreads that Amara has arrived, students begin to approach. There's no pity in their eyes, no awkwardness, just genuine warmth and friendship. Lily leads the charge, presenting Amara with a brand new backpack filled with school supplies. We missed you, Lily says simply, pulling Amara into a hug. The moment seems to break a dam. Soon, Amara is surrounded by classmates, all eager to show her the donations they've brought, to include her in their plans for the day. For the first time in months, Amara looks like what she is, a child, free from the burden of adult worries. Mrs. Thompson watches the scene unfold, her heart full to bursting. But she knows their work is far from over. With a nod to Mr. Reynolds, she slips out of the gymnasium and heads to his office. Inside, a different kind of donation is being processed. Local professionals, lawyers, financial advisors, job counselors have volunteered their services. They sit with Mrs. Johnson, patiently explaining options, outlining plans for the future. It's not just about today or tomorrow, but about creating lasting change. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Students and teachers alike surge forward, offering ideas, volunteering time and resources. The gymnasium becomes a hub of activity, with groups forming to organize clothing drives, food collections, and fundraising events. Lily takes charge of a group of Amara's classmates, their young faces set with determination as they plan a special welcome-back celebration for their friend. The art teacher offers to lead a mural project, creating a lasting symbol of hope and community on the school walls. As the day progresses, news of Oakwood Elementary's efforts spreads beyond the school gates. Local businesses begin calling, offering donations and support. The town's small newspaper sends a reporter, eager to share the story of a community coming together in a time of need. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Mrs. Thompson finds a quiet moment to call Amara's mother. The conversation is emotional, filled with tears and heartfelt thanks. Mrs. Johnson's voice breaks as she describes the weight lifting from her shoulders, the hope she feels for the first time in months. As the final bell rings, signaling the end of this extraordinary school day, the atmosphere in Oakwood Elementary is electric with purpose and compassion. Students leave with arms full of flyers to distribute, their minds buzzing with ideas to help. Teachers stay late, planning lessons on empathy and community service. Mr. Reynolds stands at the school entrance, watching as the last students file out. The lines of worry that have creased his face all day have softened, replaced by a look of quiet amazement at the outpouring of support he's witnessed. Mrs. Thompson joins him, her own expression a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "We did it," she says softly. "We really did it." Mr. Reynolds nods, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "We've made a start," he replies, "but this is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead of us." As they turn to head back inside to continue the work that will stretch long into the night, a car pulls up to the school. Amara and her mother step out, their faces a mixture of trepidation and hope. The sight of them galvanizes Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Thompson. They move forward as one, arms outstretched in welcome. "Come in," Mr. Reynolds says warmly. "We have so much to show you." As they lead Amara and her mother into the school, into the embrace of a community that has rallied to support them, there's a sense of something profound taking place. The halls of Oakwood Elementary, usually quiet at this hour, echo with the sounds of hope and determination. In the principal's office, now transformed into a command center of compassion, Amara's eyes widen as she takes in the stacks of donated clothes, the boxes of food, the lists of available services. Her mother's hand flies to her mouth, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "All of this," Mrs. Johnson whispers, tears streaming down her face, "for us." Mr. Reynolds places a gentle hand on her shoulder. "For you," he confirms, "and for every family that might find themselves in need. This isn't just about today, it's about creating a lasting change in our community." As night falls outside, the lights of Oakwood Elementary burn bright, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Inside, plans are made, resources are allocated, and a little girl who has known too much hardship begins to smile again. The mystery of Amara's hidden feat has been solved, but in its place, something far more powerful has emerged, a testament to the strength of community, the power of compassion, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to let anyone fall through the cracks. As Amara leans against her mother, exhausted but finally feeling safe, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Reynolds exchange a look of quiet triumph. They know the road ahead will be challenging, that there will be setbacks and obstacles to overcome. But in this moment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what can be accomplished when people come together, they feel ready to face whatever comes next. The story of Amara and her hidden feat is far from over, but now it's a story of hope, of redemption, of a community that opened its heart and changed not just one life, but the very fabric of their town. And as the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky above Oakwood Elementary, there's a sense that this is just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Amara, but for all of them. As they exit the car, a sudden gust of wind whips through the trees, sending a shower of raindrops cascading around them. Mrs. Thompson shivers, but not from the cold. It feels like an omen, nature itself expressing the turmoil they all feel inside. In Mr. Reynolds' office, they gather around his desk, the atmosphere tense with unspoken fears and desperate determination. Sarah Chen is on her phone, speaking rapidly to her superiors, explaining the unprecedented situation they've uncovered. Mrs. Thompson sinks into a chair, her mind whirling. She thinks of Amara's classmates, of Lely who tried so hard to reach out to her friend. Do any of them know where Amara goes after school? Have they been unwitting witnesses to a tragedy unfolding in their midst? Mr. Reynolds paces the room, his usual calm demeanor shaken. "We need to contact the police," he says, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "This goes beyond a simple welfare check now. Amara could be in real danger." As Sarah Chen ends her call, her face is grim. "My superiors agree," she says. "They're treating this as a potential abduction case. We need to move fast." The word abduction hangs in the air, heavy and terrifying. Mrs. Thompson feels her heart constrict. Abduction implies a perpetrator, someone who has deliberately taken Amara, hidden her away from those who might help. The thought of what that person might be capable of sends a shudder through her. "What can we do?" she asks, her voice small but determined. "How do we find her?" Mr. Reynolds stops his pacing, turning to face them with renewed purpose. "We start with what we know," he says. "We go through every record, every interaction. Someone must have seen something, noticed something. We'll talk to her classmates, her teachers from previous years. We'll leave no stone unturned." As they begin to formulate a plan, dividing tasks and pooling resources, Mrs. Thompson can't help but glance at the clock on the wall. In just a few hours, the final bell will ring. Students will pour out of classrooms, eager to start their weekend. But for Amara, that bell might signal the start of another nightmare. The rain continues to fall outside, drumming against the windows in a relentless rhythm. But inside Mr. Reynolds' office, a storm of a different kind is brewing. It's a tempest of determination, of righteous anger, of desperate hope. As Mrs. Thompson stands to begin her part of the search, she pauses at the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the rain-soaked playground and the mist-shrouded streets, Amara is waiting for someone to unravel the mystery, to see through the careful facade she's constructed, to reach out and pull her from the darkness. "Hold on, Amara," Mrs. Thompson whispers, her breath fogging the glass. "We're coming. Just hold on a little longer." With renewed purpose, she turns back to the room, ready to dive into the search. The mystery of Amara's hidden feet has evolved into something far more sinister, a puzzle with potentially life-altering consequences. But as Mrs. Thompson meets the determined gazes of Mr. Reynolds and Sarah Chen, she knows one thing for certain. They will not rest until Amara is found, until she is safe, until the truth, no matter how painful, is brought to light. The clock ticks on, each second a reminder of the urgency of their mission. Outside, the rain continues to fall, washing away old certainties and ushering in a new chapter filled with danger, discovery, and the unwavering hope that they're not too late to save one small brave girl from the shadows that threaten to engulf her. The sky over Oakwood Elementary darkens ominously, a foreboding canopy of steel-gray clouds blotting out the last remnants of daylight. A distant rumble of thunder echoes across the playground, empty swings swaying in the rising wind like ghostly pendulums. Inside the school, the fluorescent lights flicker, casting eerie shadows that dance along the hallways. Mrs. Thompson stands at the window of her classroom, her forehead pressed against the cool glass. Her eyes scan the deserted schoolyard, searching for what? A sign, a clue, anything that might lead them to Amara. Behind her, the room buzzes with tension as Mr. Reynolds and Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services pore over student records and interview notes. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminates the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm has arrived in full force, sheets of rain lashing against the windows with a fury that matches the turmoil in Mrs. Thompson's heart. "We're running out of time," Mr. Reynolds says, his voice tight with frustration. "If we don't find Amara soon." As they make their way out of the storage room, Amara leaning heavily on Mrs. Thompson for support, the storm outside begins to abate. The rain lessens to a gentle patter, the wind dying down to a whisper. In Mr. Reynolds' office, wrapped in fresh blankets and sipping hot cocoa, Amara begins to open up more. She tells them about the long nights in the car, huddled in the backseat with her mother, trying to stay warm, about washing up in gas station bathrooms and changing clothes in park restrooms. about the constant fear of being discovered, of being separated from the only family she has left. With each word, each painful revelation, the adults in the room feel a mix of heartbreak and determination. Heartbreak for what this young girl has endured, and determination to ensure she never has to face such hardships again. As the last light of day fades, replaced by the soft glow of street lamps outside, they receive word that Amara's mother has been found. She's safe, frantic with worry about her daughter, and on her way to the school. The reunion, when it comes, is a storm of emotions to rival the one that just passed. Amara flies into her mother's arms, both of them dissolving into tears of relief and love. Mrs. Johnson, looking worn and desperate, clings to her daughter as if afraid she might disappear. Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Thompson, and Sarah Chen watch the scene with a mixture of joy and sadness. They know that this is just the beginning, that there are hard conversations and difficult decisions ahead. But for now, they allow themselves to bask in the warmth of this moment. A moment of connection, of truth, of hope. As the night deepens, plans are made, emergency housing is arranged, social services are contacted, support systems are put into place. It's a start, a first step on a long journey towards stability and healing. Mrs. Thompson finds herself at the window once more, watching as Amara and her mother are escorted to a waiting car. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air fresh with the scent of rain and renewal. The mystery of Amara's hidden feet has been solved, revealing a truth far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. But in its resolution, a new chapter begins, one of compassion, of community, of the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. As the car pulls away, carrying Amara and her mother towards a future suddenly bright with possibility, Mrs. Thompson makes a silent vow. She will not let this be the end of the story. She will fight for Amara, for all the children facing unseen battles. Because sometimes, the most important lessons happen outside the classroom, and the most vital education is in how we care for one another. The night settles over Oakwood Elementary, stars peeking out from behind dissipating clouds. And in that quiet moment, as the echoes of the day's revelations still resonate through the empty halls, there's a sense of change in the air. A reminder that even the smallest act of kindness, the simplest gesture of understanding, can be the first raindrop in a storm of compassion powerful enough to wash away the darkest of sorrows. The first rays of dawn break over Oakwood Elementary, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, droplets of water clinging to every surface like tiny jewels. But inside the school, in the principal's office, a different kind of storm is brewing, one of emotion, compassion, and fierce determination. Mr. Reynolds sits behind his desk, his usually stoic demeanor shattered. His shoulders shake with silent sobs, tears streaming down his face as he struggles to compose himself. The weight of Amara's story, the sheer magnitude of what this young girl and her mother have endured, has broken through his professional facade, revealing the deeply caring man beneath. Mrs. Thompson stands nearby, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. She places a comforting hand on Mr. Reynolds' shoulder, feeling the tremors that run through him. "John," she says softly, using his first name for perhaps the first time in their long professional relationship, "we need to act now." Her words seem to snap Mr. Reynolds back to the present. He straightens, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. When he looks up at Mrs. Thompson, his gaze is filled with a fire she's never seen before. "You're right," he says, his voice hoarse but determined. "We're going to fix this. We have to." With hands that still shake slightly, Mr. Reynolds reaches for his phone. His fingers fly over the keypad, muscle memory taking over as he dials numbers he knows by heart, but has never had to use with such urgency. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Students and teachers alike surge forward, offering ideas, volunteering time and resources. The gymnasium becomes a hub of activity, with groups forming to organize clothing drives, food collections, and fundraising events. Lily takes charge of a group of Amara's classmates, their young faces set with determination as they plan a special welcome-back celebration for their friend. The art teacher offers to lead a mural project, creating a lasting symbol of hope and community on the school walls. As the day progresses, news of Oakwood Elementary's efforts spreads beyond the school gates. Local businesses begin calling, offering donations and support. The town's small newspaper sends a reporter, eager to share the story of a community coming together in a time of need. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Mrs. Thompson finds a quiet moment to call Amara's mother. The conversation is emotional, filled with tears and heartfelt thanks. Mrs. Johnson's voice breaks as she describes the weight lifting from her shoulders, the hope she feels for the first time in months. As the final bell rings, signaling the end of this extraordinary school day, the atmosphere in Oakwood Elementary is electric with purpose and compassion. Students leave with arms full of flyers to distribute, their minds buzzing with ideas to help. Teachers stay late, planning lessons on empathy and community service. Mr. Reynolds stands at the school entrance, watching as the last students file out. The lines of worry that have creased his face all day have softened, replaced by a look of quiet amazement at the outpouring of support he's witnessed. Mrs. Thompson joins him, her own expression a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "We did it," she says softly. "We really did it." Mr. Reynolds nods, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "We've made a start," he replies, "but this is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead of us." As they turn to head back inside to continue the work that will stretch long into the night, a car pulls up to the school. Amara and her mother step out, their faces a mixture of trepidation and hope. The sight of them galvanizes Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Thompson. They move forward as one, arms outstretched in welcome. "Come in," Mr. Reynolds says warmly. "We have so much to show you." As they lead Amara and her mother into the school, into the embrace of a community that has rallied to support them, there's a sense of something profound taking place. The halls of Oakwood Elementary, usually quiet at this hour, echo with the sounds of hope and determination. In the principal's office, now transformed into a command center of compassion, Amara's eyes widen as she takes in the stacks of donated clothes, the boxes of food, the lists of available services. Her mother's hand flies to her mouth, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "All of this," Mrs. Johnson whispers, tears streaming down her face, "for us." Mr. Reynolds places a gentle hand on her shoulder. "For you," he confirms, "and for every family that might find themselves in need. This isn't just about today, it's about creating a lasting change in our community." As night falls outside, the lights of Oakwood Elementary burn bright, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Inside, plans are made, resources are allocated, and a little girl who has known too much hardship begins to smile again. The mystery of Amara's hidden feat has been solved, but in its place, something far more powerful has emerged, a testament to the strength of community, the power of compassion, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to let anyone fall through the cracks. As Amara leans against her mother, exhausted but finally feeling safe, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Reynolds exchange a look of quiet triumph. They know the road ahead will be challenging, that there will be setbacks and obstacles to overcome. But in this moment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what can be accomplished when people come together, they feel ready to face whatever comes next. The story of Amara and her hidden feat is far from over, but now it's a story of hope, of redemption, of a community that opened its heart and changed not just one life, but the very fabric of their town. And as the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky above Oakwood Elementary, there's a sense that this is just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Amara, but for all of them. The morning sun rises over Oakwood Elementary, its golden rays painting the brick facade with a warm glow. But today, the school buzzes with an energy that has nothing to do with the weather. The air thrums with purpose, with compassion, with the unmistakable feeling that something extraordinary is unfolding. In the gymnasium, transformed overnight into a makeshift donation center, Mrs. Thompson stands in awe. Tables groan under the weight of clothes, shoes, and non-perishable food items. Volunteers, a mix of students, parents, and staff, weave between the piles, sorting and organizing with determined efficiency. "Mrs. Thompson," a voice calls out. It's Lily, her face flushed with excitement as she rushes over, arms laden with brand new backpacks. "Look what my dad's company donated. There's one for Amara, and extras for any other kid who might need them. Mrs. Thompson's heart swells with pride. "That's wonderful, Lily. Thank you." She watches as the young girl carefully arranges the backpacks, making sure each one is perfectly placed. The care in her actions speaks volumes about the impact Amara's story has had on her classmates. Across the room, Mr. Reynolds is deep in conversation with a group of local business owners. Their voices are low, but the excitement is palpable. One man, the owner of a nearby hotel, is gesturing animatedly. Mrs. Thompson catches snippets of their conversation: temporary housing, job opportunities, community support. As she makes her way through the gym, Mrs. Thompson is struck by the sheer variety of donations. There are basics, of course: clothes, food, toiletries. But there are also books, toys, and even a laptop computer donated by the local electronics store. Each item represents not just material support, but a message: you are not alone. We see you. We care. Outside, in the school parking lot, a different kind of flurry is taking place. A moving truck, donated for the day by a local company, is being loaded with furniture. Volunteers form a human chain, passing sofas, beds, and kitchen appliances from hand to hand. The air rings with calls of encouragement and the occasional grunt of exertion. Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services stands nearby, clipboard in hand, overseeing the logistics. Her professional demeanor is softened by the smile that keeps tugging at her lips. "I've never seen anything like this," she confides to Mrs. Thompson. "The speed at which this community has mobilized. It's incredible." As the morning progresses, more and more people arrive. Parents drop off donations on their way to work. Students who would normally be sleeping in on a Saturday show up in droves, eager to help. Even the local media has caught wind of the story, with a news van parked discreetly at the edge of the school grounds. In the midst of the controlled chaos, a hush suddenly falls over the gymnasium. All eyes turn to the entrance, where Amara and her mother have just appeared. They stand frozen, overwhelmed by the scene before them. Mr. Reynolds is at their side in an instant, his hand gently guiding them into the room. "This is all for you," he says softly, "and for anyone else who might need help in the future." Mrs. Johnson's eyes fill with tears as she takes in the mountains of donations, the faces of friends and strangers alike who have come together to support her family. Amara, usually so reserved, breaks into a smile that lights up her entire face. As word spreads that Amara has arrived, students begin to approach. There's no pity in their eyes, no awkwardness, just genuine warmth and friendship. Lily leads the charge, presenting Amara with a brand new backpack filled with school supplies. "We missed you," Lily says simply, pulling Amara into a hug. The moment seems to break a dam. Soon, Amara is surrounded by classmates, all eager to show her the donations they've brought, to include her in their plans for the day. For the first time in months, Amara looks like what she is, a child, free from the burden of adult worries. Mrs. Thompson watches the scene unfold, her heart full to bursting. But she knows their work is far from over. With a nod to Mr. Reynolds, she slips out of the gymnasium and heads to his office. Inside, a different kind of donation is being processed. Local professionals, lawyers, financial advisors, job counselors have volunteered their services. They sit with Mrs. Johnson, patiently explaining options, outlining plans for the future. It's not just about today or tomorrow, but about creating lasting change.